Isla Bennett once believed the world could be made of colors. In the quiet corners of her childhood home, she painted the skies she wished she could fly through, the oceans she dreamed of sinking into, the places where joy might live if she ever found it. Her parents, soft-spoken, bookish, endlessly warm, were her world. And that world, though modest, was filled with laughter that spilled like sunlight across the floors. But at 16, everything changed. It was meant to be just another weekend hike. They were experienced, careful, but when the news came, an accident, a fall, no survivors. Isla's world didn't just shatter, it disappeared. There was no goodbye, no final hug, just silence. She was sent to live with an aunt and uncle in a town that felt colder than winter and quieter than grief. They gave her a room, a schedule, a plate at dinner, but no love, no softness, just survival. And so, Isla stopped speaking, at least in ways people understood. Her paintbrush became her only language. Canvas after canvas bled with shades of sorrow no one cared to name. She didn't ask for hugs anymore, didn't wait for someone to notice her. But deep in the aching corners of her soul, something small refused to die. Hope. Hope that maybe one day someone would look at her and not just see a responsibility. Not a pity project. Not a burden. But a girl with oceans in her eyes and 1,000 unsaid stories in her hands. She wanted nothing more than a quiet life, just her and her art, untouched by judgment or demand. But life, in its cruel timing, had one more detour plan. And this time, it wouldn't just steal her freedom, would offer her a future that didn't feel like hers at all. Isla's 23rd birthday arrived like any other gray morning in the Bennett house. No cake, no candles, not even a quiet acknowledgement over breakfast. The kitchen smelled faintly of burned toast and bitter coffee. Her aunt sat straight-backed at the table, eyes unreadable, a single white envelope resting between her manicured fingers. "Sit," she said, not unkindly, but not kindly either. Isla sat. Her uncle leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Neither looked at her when they spoke. "You're getting married," her aunt said flatly, sliding the envelope across the table. "His name is Graham Ward, he's agreed." Isla blinked. "Married? To who?" Graham Ward, they explained, was an architect, reputable, wealthy, recently widowed, 43, polished, private. He lived in a sprawling home on the edge of town, too quiet, too still. He was offering to help their family in exchange for Isla's hand, a transaction dressed as salvation. Her uncle added, "You can't live in this house forever like some ghost in the attic, Isla. This is a good opportunity for all of us." But nothing about it felt good. It felt like being sold. Isla's pulse thundered, her fingers trembled. "No," she whispered. But the decision had already been made. Arrangements were finalized, her name, her future, her body. Spoken for without consent. She cried, pleaded, begged. And then 2 weeks later, she stood in front of a mirror wearing a wedding dress she didn't choose, while strangers zipped up the back and told her she looked beautiful. The gown was delicate, lace like spiderwebs, satin that shimmered like ice, but to her, it felt like the softest kind of cage. When the church doors opened, a hush fell over the room. Isla's hands clutched the bouquet so tightly her knuckles turned white. She walked down the aisle, not toward a dream, but toward surrender, toward a man she had never spoken to. Graham stood still at the altar, tall, composed, not unkind but unreadable. He wore a suit like armor, and silence like a second skin. When the officiant asked, "Do you take this man?" her voice barely made it past her lips. "I do." The words echoed through the cathedral like a verdict. And in that moment, Isla didn't feel like a bride. She felt like a girl being handed over to a stranger, in exchange for silence. The applause still echoed in Isla's ears as they stepped out of the church and into the waiting car. She felt like a shadow in white silk, her limbs moving, her lips smiling faintly, her body present, but her soul was elsewhere, curled into a quiet corner, too bruised to speak. Graham sat beside her in silence, his posture formal, his presence oddly distant. Not cold, just unreadable. The ride to his estate passed in a blur of blurred lights and tightening breath, and when they arrived, The house loomed before her like a chapter she didn't want to open. Tall, beautiful, silent, much like the man who now held the keys to her future. He opened the car door for her, his hand briefly brushing the small of her back, a touch so light, yet it made her stomach twist. Inside, the house was immaculate. Wide hallways, marble floors, art on the walls she couldn't bring herself to look at. It was the kind of home that held its breath. He led her upstairs, stopping at a large bedroom bathed in warm, golden light. Everything was elegant, perfect, lifeless. She stood by the doorway, heart racing, unsure if her legs would hold. "You can change in the bathroom," Graham said, voice low, even. She did as told, more out of instinct than choice, and when she returned in a silk nightgown, he hadn't moved from the sofa, jacket off, collar loosened, hands resting quietly in his lap. "I'm scared," she said before she could stop herself. He looked up, and for the first time, really looked at her. Not as a bride, not as a transaction, just a person. "You don't have to be," he said gently. "Nothing will happen tonight, or any night, unless you choose it." She blinked, unsure if she heard him right. "I'll take the sofa," he added, unfolding a blanket. "Sleep well, Isla." As he turned away, she stood frozen, something warm and unfamiliar rising in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the first quiet whisper of safety. The morning after their wedding, Isla woke to sunlight crawling gently across the bed sheets. The other side of the room was quiet, the sofa empty, the blanket folded, not a wrinkle out of place. Graham had vanished like a passing shadow, leaving no trace. Except one. On the nightstand lay a small bundle of lavender, bound in twine, and a folded piece of paper. "Wishing you a gentle morning. G." No demands, no explanations, just quiet care in ink and scent. She stared at it longer than she meant to. It was the first softness she had received in what felt like years. That day, the house felt less like a cage and more like a museum of subtle gestures. Her favorite tea waiting on the kitchen counter, a novel she loved placed on the windowsill, a knit scarf, lavender again, folded neatly over the banister. Each offering arrived in silence, unannounced, unclaimed. Graham never asked if she liked them. He never stood nearby, expecting gratitude. He never even looked for her reaction. It unsettled her at first, then it confused her. But eventually, it softened her. He wasn't trying to win her. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was simply letting her know he saw her. That evening, she found herself lingering at the door of the library. Graham was there, reading by the firelight, completely absorbed. The glow touched the edges of his face, revealing a quiet man carved out of shadows and stillness. He looked up when he sensed her. Their eyes met, and this time she didn't look away. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. He closed the book, thought for a moment, then replied, "Because I want you to know, you're not a transaction, you're not an obligation, you're human, and you deserve to be treated like one." The words didn't just reach her, they rooted inside her. That night, before she went to bed, she tiptoed into the living room, heart unsteady, and left a single slip of paper on the edge of the table where he always sat. 2 simple words. "Thank you." And somehow, in that quiet moment, everything between them shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, but like the first breeze before spring. The days that followed were quiet, but not the same kind of quiet as before. Something had shifted. It lived in the way Isla lingered a little longer at breakfast, in the soft glances they exchanged as they passed each other in the hallway, in the unspoken understanding that neither of them owed the other anything, yet both kept showing up. One evening, the storm rolled in. Sharp wind, restless trees, thunder low and distant. She went to bed early, thinking she'd finally found a rhythm her heart could rest in. But grief has its own sense of timing. That night, the mountain returned. The sound of rocks slipping, boots scrambling, her father's distant voice calling her name. Then the silence, the awful, awful silence. She woke gasping, drenched in sweat, chest heaving, heart galloping like it was trying to escape her ribs. The bedroom door creaked open. Graham stepped inside, barefoot, unsure. His face was calm, but his eyes searched hers. "Nightmare?" he asked softly. She nodded, unable to find the words. He didn't rush closer, just waited. "It was the mountain," she whispered eventually. "A hiking accident, there was a storm. My parents didn't make it back." He sat at the edge of the bed, hands resting on his knees, gaze steady. "My wife died in a fire," he said after a long pause. "I was the one who designed the house. I missed her call that night. I thought I had time." Their pain hung in the space between them, not competing, not comparing, just coexisting. Isla looked at him, not as a stranger, not as a husband, but as someone who knew, really knew. She reached for his hand, not to be held, but simply to connect. Her fingertips brushed his. He didn't flinch. "We lost the people who made the world feel safe," she murmured. Graham nodded. "But maybe we can make something safe again, together." She leaned into him, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. He stayed still, letting her decide the distance. The storm outside raged on, but inside there was only stillness. And in that stillness, something soft and unseen began to grow. Not love. Not yet. But the soil where it could take root. The morning after the storm, Isla didn't wake to panic. She woke slowly, her body curled under soft sheets, her mind still lingering in the moment her head had rested against Graham's shoulder. How still he'd been, how solid. She turned, half expecting him to be gone. But there he was. Not on the sofa, but in the chair across the room, book in hand, glasses slipping down his nose, as if he hadn't moved all night. Their eyes met. No words, just a shared quiet. Later that day, something in Isla shifted. Not suddenly, not loudly, but surely. She found herself humming while folding her scarf. She paused to admire the sunlight through the stained glass window by the stairs. And for the first time since the wedding, she felt something that didn't carry weight. Ease. That night after dinner, she lingered in the doorway of his study. Graham looked up from his work, calm as always. "Couldn't sleep?" She shook her head. "Didn't want to." He closed the notebook gently. "Want to sit?" She did, but not on the chair across the room. She walked over to him, slowly, carefully, and sat beside him on the couch, their shoulders brushing. There was a pause. Then Isla whispered, "I've been waiting for the fear to leave, for the memories to stop hurting, for someone to tell me when I'm ready." She turned to him, her voice steadier now. "But I think maybe ready isn't something that arrives. Maybe it's something you choose." Graham's gaze held hers. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm here." There was no rush, no dramatic kiss, no sweeping declarations, just two people sitting side by side, breathing in the same stillness they'd once feared. And then Isla leaned forward, just enough to close the space between them, and pressed her lips to his. Not out of obligation, not out of curiosity, but trust. He didn't deepen the kiss. He waited, like he always had, for her to lead. When she did, it was with the quiet power of someone reclaiming her own story. That night, she didn't feel like something given away. She felt like someone who had chosen. Not because she was finally ready, but because she was finally allowed to become ready on her own terms. And for the first time in years, that choice felt like freedom. The next morning, the house felt softer. Not because it had changed, but because she had. Isla walked through it not as a guest or an intruder, but as someone who belonged. At breakfast, she poured his tea before he could offer. Their fingers brushed when he reached for the cup. Neither pulled away. Later, she found a small hand-bound sketchbook left on the windowsill where she often stood to watch the light move across the floor. No note this time, just presence, just thought. That evening they sat by the fire again, but this time she leaned into him before he even opened his book. They spoke in fragments, childhood memories, favorite smells, things they missed that had no name. Their laughter came easily now, unforced. Not loud, but warm. He didn't call her beautiful. He didn't need to. He listened like she was art in motion. And for Isla, that meant more. This wasn't the love she thought people wrote about, the kind that overwhelmed and consumed. This was different. It was the kind that crept in slowly, like light beneath a door. The kind that didn't ask her to give herself away, but taught her, piece by piece, how to return to herself. With him, she didn't feel rescued. She didn't just feel seen. She felt known. Not just safe, but anchored. Not chosen out of convenience, but cherished by choice. And for the first time in her life, love didn't feel like surrender. It felt like home. 1 year later, Isla woke to the sound of breathing. Not rushed, not shallow, just steady. Warmth pressed softly against her back. An arm curled protectively around her waist, and nestled between them, with cheeks the color of spring roses, was their daughter. Barely 3 weeks old, but already the quietest light Isla had ever known. She stayed still, eyes half-lidded, watching the morning sun spill in through the curtains, catching on Graham's shoulder, on their baby's sleeping face. This moment, the stillness, felt like something holy. "She looks like you," Graham murmured, voice rough from sleep but rich with awe. Isla turned toward him, brushing a strand of hair away from his forehead. His eyes were tired but soft, no longer carrying the weight of what was lost, but filled now with what had been found. There were no grand speeches, just the kind of silence where every heartbeat was heard. Isla kissed their daughter's forehead, then looked back at the man beside her. "You never rushed me," she whispered. "You waited, even when I didn't know I was worth waiting for." Graham smiled faintly, pulling her closer. "I didn't wait because I had to," he said. "I stayed because you, are home." And in that quiet room, with sunlight warming the sheets and 3 heartbeats woven into one rhythm, Isla knew. She was no longer the girl who had been handed away. She was a woman who had chosen. Chosen love, chosen trust, chosen him. And after years of surviving a life she hadn't asked for, she had finally stepped into the life she was meant to build. Not by force, not by fear, but by love that came softly and stayed forever.